Zoom out over any American suburb from the air on a July afternoon. The rooflines stretch in every direction, steep, peaked, uniform, row after row of triangular silhouettes baking in the sun. Nearly half of all single-family homes in the United States have one of those peaks, and underneath each one sits a sealed chamber that most families use to store Christmas decorations and broken furniture. On a summer afternoon, that chamber reaches 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than Death Valley's record surface temperature. In the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan, fewer than 10% of homes are built this way. Not because they have different storage habits, because America made one very specific choice that almost nobody noticed, and then never fully unmade it. The steep pitch roof that creates the American attic did not grow from American soil. It was borrowed, then locked in, and the lock was federal. Start with the numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau counts roughly 50 million detached single-family homes in America. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies estimated in 2021 that between 42 and 47% of pre-1980 housing stock includes a full or partial attic. That is somewhere between 20 and 23 million homes, built around a thermally isolated, structurally expensive, largely unused void between the ceiling and the roof. Compare that to the United Kingdom, where Part L of the 2021 building regulations treats the roof void as a thermal envelope problem to be sealed and insulated flat, not pitched open and vented. In Germany, the Energieinsparverordnung, the National Energy Savings Ordinance, actively incentivizes low pitch and flat roof construction. Japan briefly flirted with gable pitch housing during American occupation after World War II, then returned to its own standards. Japan's current housing performance indication system does not reward ventilated attic voids at all. And here is the cost. According to National Association of Home Builders data from 2022, a standard 2,000 square foot home with a conventional attic requires $4,000 to $8,000 more in framing lumber than a flat or low slope equivalent. More expensive, thermally worse, almost entirely absent in peer nations, and yet every American builder kept adding them. The obvious answer is climate. Cold winters, steep roofs shed snow. Except Florida, Texas, Arizona. The attic never stopped. The steep pitch gabled roof is not American by origin. It evolved in Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands, where roof pitches of 45 degrees or greater were necessary to shed the weight of heavy snowfall and drive off sheets of rain before they saturated the structure beneath. It worked exactly as intended in those climates. When British colonists brought their construction habits to New England, the steep pitch made sense there too. Cold, wet, snow-heavy winters. The form fit the function. The problem is what happened next. There is a standard defense of the ventilated attic. It protects the ceiling below from radiant heat gain by creating a buffer zone between the hot roof surface and the living space underneath. That is technically true, but only compared to a dark, completely sealed, completely uninsulated space. Research from Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Roof Research Center, conducted from 1991 to 1999, found that a properly insulated flat roof performs comparably or better than a ventilated attic system in hot climates. The key word is properly. The ventilated attic defense requires continuous soffit-to-ridge airflow, proper vapor barriers, and insulation levels between R38 and R60. Almost none of the post-war American housing stock was built to that standard. What builders actually constructed was something simpler. Thinner ceiling joists, no structural floor, no thermal bridging control, and minimal ventilation that met the letter of the code without achieving the thermal outcome the code claimed to target. The steep pitch came from Europe. The void stayed for a different reason entirely, and that reason was written into federal law. In July 2023, Barbara Radis was living in a 1971 colonial-style home in Naperville, Illinois. The house had its original attic, no ridge venting upgrade, no insulation improvements since construction. On a standard summer afternoon, her HVAC system failed. The repair contractor pulled an access panel and ran a temperature probe into the attic at 2 p.m. The reading was 158 degrees Fahrenheit. The ducts running through that attic, the ducts that were supposed to be delivering cooled air to every room in the house, had surface temperatures exceeding 130 degrees. The contractor estimated that the system was losing between 30 and 40% of its cooling output before the air ever reached a living space. That loss was not a malfunction, it was the design. Radis's lawyer pulled the original 1971 building permit. The roof pitch was specified at 8 to 12, a 33.7 degree angle. The attic ventilation ratio was listed at 1 to 300, the minimum code requirement at the time. ASHRAE Standard 62.2, revised in later years, would eventually identify the 1 to 300 ratio as insufficient for hot climate performance. The 1971 permit met every standard in force when the house was built. This is not an isolated case. A 2019 Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory study found that homes with HVAC ducts running through unconditioned attic spaces lose an average of 20 to 30% of system output to thermal gain. The study estimated this affects approximately 30 million homes in the United States. Radis's legal team, in the process of building their case, surfaced something else inside those 1971 documents. An FHA appraisal report attached to the original mortgage file listed the steep roof pitch and the presence of an accessible attic as positive valuation markers. The attic was not a design compromise. It was a selling point, a federally endorsed asset. The contractor told her the attic was normal for its time. That phrase, normal for its time, is where this story actually begins. The Federal Housing Administration was established in 1934. Its founding purpose was to stabilize a devastated mortgage market by ensuring home loans against default, making banks willing to lend and buyers able to borrow. To define what it would ensure, the FHA created a set of minimum property standards, a list of construction requirements that a home had to meet before a federally backed mortgage could be issued against it. In 1958, the FHA revised and codified those standards in a form that would govern American residential construction for decades. The revised minimum property standards established a minimum roof pitch of 3 to 12 for insured properties. Flat roofs and low-slope alternatives were not outright banned, but they required expensive waterproofing systems that added cost and frequently failed the appraisal process. The practical effect was a near mandate for pitched roof construction, which meant attics. Here is the mechanism: no FHA approval, no federally insured mortgage. No federally insured mortgage meant virtually no sale in the post-war mass market, where FHA insured loans represented between 40 and 50% of all new home mortgages issued between 1945 and 1965, according to HUD historical data. Builders had one rational response: build what FHA would approve. William Levitt understood this perfectly. Levitt & Sons, the company that built Levitt-Town and effectively invented the American mass production suburb, calibrated its standard roof pitch, 6 to 12, steep enough to satisfy FHA appraisers, explicitly to FHA minimum property standards. Housing historian Barbara Kelly documents this directly in her 1993 book, Expanding the American Dream. The pitch was not an aesthetic choice, it was a compliance decision. And then there is the National Lumber Manufacturers Association. From 1946 to 1952, the NLMA lobbied Congress and the FHA directly to maintain conventional stick frame construction standards. Steep pitch roofs require substantially more framing lumber than low slope or flat alternatives. In the 1950 congressional testimony, NLMA representatives argued for the preservation of standards that, by design or by outcome, required the construction method their industry supplied. Once FHA standards normalized the steep pitch attic present design, local building codes followed. Municipalities adopted FHA adjacent construction requirements because housing needed to be mortgageable. The federal standard cascaded downward into every county permit office in the country. The attic was not a design preference. It was not a regional habit. It was the physical byproduct of a federal mortgage eligibility rule that privileged a specific framing type, a framing type that the lumber industry had lobbied to protect. They knew. In 1965, an internal HUD memo, later released through a Freedom of Information Act request, acknowledged that the FHA's roof pitch standards had not been derived from thermal performance research. They had been inherited from pre-war appraisal guidelines written before modern insulation science existed. The standards were not based on evidence. They were based on precedent. In 1976, Oak Ridge National Laboratory formally established its Roof Research Center. Within years, early reports were documenting that ventilated attics in hot climates consistently underperformed sealed and conditioned assemblies. Those findings were distributed to HUD. The agency received them and did not act. In 1980, ESHRE Standard 90. A 1980, a national guideline for energy conservation in buildings, explicitly recommended against routing HVAC ducts through unconditioned spaces. The standard was voluntary. The FHA minimum property standards were not updated to reflect it. In 1992, the U.S. Department of Energy launched its Building America program, which began producing research and case studies demonstrating the performance advantages of encapsulated attic designs, sealed conditioned attics, where the roof assembly itself becomes part of the thermal envelope. HUD reviewed this work. The minimum property standards were not revised. In 2006, Florida became the first state to directly incentivize conditioned attic construction inside its building code. The push came not from federal policy, but from post-hurricane energy audits that documented, in house after house after house, catastrophic HVAC losses in attic duct systems. The structural reason nothing changed federally is not mysterious. Revising FH. A minimum property standards requires congressional attention or a formal action by the HUD secretary. Every revision creates losers. The residential construction industry had spent 60 years building supply chains, training framers, calibrating appraisal systems, and establishing business models around the existing standard. When the 2009 cycle of international residential code deliberations included a push for conditioned attic requirements, the National Association of Home Builders formally opposed it, citing upfront cost increases. The Department of Energy had data showing that life cycle HVAC savings exceeded the upfront cost difference. The NAHB opposed it anyway. The provision did not pass. By 2010, every major federal energy laboratory had issued findings recommending against the standard ventilated attic in hot and mixed climates. The standard had not changed. A code fix did eventually arrive. In 2012, Section R806.5 of the International Residential Code created a formal pathway for unvented attic assemblies, a legal construction route for encapsulated attics that brought the roofline insulation into the conditioned building envelope. On paper, the solution existed. The adoption gap tells a different story. As of 2022, only 14 states had fully adopted the 2021 International Residential Code. 11 states were still operating under pre-2015 code cycles, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures Building Codes Tracker. Florida, Georgia, and Texas had moved fastest toward conditioned attic adoption, driven not by federal mandate, but by insurance companies recalculating risk after hurricane seasons and energy auditors quantifying the losses in real-time data. But encapsulated attics require insulation at the roofline rather than the ceiling plane. The product almost universally used for that application is closed-cell spray polyurethane foam. And here is the second problem. Closed-cell spray foam has a global warming potential approximately 1,500 times that of carbon dioxide over 100 years, driven by the hydrofluorocarbon-blowing agents used in its production. A transition to HFO-based blowing agents with lower warming potential has been underway, but as of 2023, it remains incomplete across the commercial product market. The fix eliminated attic thermal loss. It replaced it with embodied carbon. Building codes have not resolved this trade-off, and then there are the 80 million homes that were already built before the fix existed. Retrofitting a conventional vented attic to an encapsulated conditioned assembly costs between $8,000 and $25,000 per home, according to Department of Energy Building. America case studies published between 2018 and 2022. It is a real upgrade with measurable energy returns. But the FHA appraisal system, the same system that rewarded attic presence as a positive valuation marker in 1971, does not systematically add value to homes that complete the retrofit. The market does not price in the improvement. The upgrade exists. The incentive to do it does not. The fix existed. The code existed. The problem is that 80 million attics were already built. Go back to that aerial image. The subdivision roof lines, the steep pitches, row after row after row. What you are looking at is not an expression of American taste. It is not a response to American weather. It is not the natural result of how people want to live. It is a physical archive of a 1,958 federal document, written to a construction standard that the lumber industry spent 6 years lobbying to protect, enforced through a mortgage eligibility mechanism that left builders with no rational alternative. Every home built to FHA standards between 1945 and 1980 is a frozen record of that policy decision. The people who live inside them did not choose the attic. They chose the house they could afford to buy with a federally insured mortgage. The attic came with the terms. The countries that do not build attics did not arrive at that difference through cultural evolution. The UK, Germany, and Japan made different regulatory choices, or made no federal choice at all, and allowed climate science to drive construction form. America made a federal choice in 1934, revised it in 1958, resisted changing it through the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, and then produced a code fix in 2012 that 22 states still had not fully adopted a decade later. The attic outlasted the conditions that created it, because 4 separate systems, the federal appraisal standard, the construction industry supply chain, the local building code adoption map, and the mortgage valuation model, all move at different speeds, and each one provided cover for the others to stay still. Barbara Radis's contractor was not wrong. The attic was normal for its time. The problem is that the time never fully ended. The next time you look up at a steeply pitched roof, you are not seeing architecture. You are seeing a federal document from 1958, written in lumber.